sheet as an attestation to that currency, and it makes sense even from a practical standpoint that sometimes they do need to access that Bitcoin on the balance sheet. So I don't think they're jumping the gun at all. But what I do think will happen is that you'll start seeing other auto companies outside of Tesla begin to hold Bitcoin and accept Bitcoin for their cars and other large purchases.
Steve, we have to leave it there. That is CoinShares U.S. head of digital assets, Steve McClurg, of course, on the heels of a very long-awaited speech by former President Trump down in Nashville over the weekend. Now coming up, it's the biggest week of the year for earnings with $27 trillion worth of companies reporting worldwide. We're going to talk about what to expect next. This is Bloomberg. Time now for the stock of the hour. We're watching 4 of the Magnificent 7 reporting earnings this week. The companies worth some $10 trillion are under pressure as the market breadth broadens out from the world's largest tech companies. We're going to discuss this now with Dan Flax, Neuberger Berman senior analyst. And you think about just how much money these Magnificent 7 names have brought in the last couple of years, where the valuations stand today, and how sensitive they are to earnings expectations. You saw how Alphabet reacted just last week. How do you feel about where we stand right now, and what has the most potential for upside?
I think we're at a very interesting period in the technology space. You're seeing continued build out of the cloud and the artificial intelligence infrastructure. As we look ahead to earnings this week, I'm excited about what I think we'll see out of Microsoft. I think their earnings will be healthy, and Amazon as well. I think the Amazon Web Services cloud business, you'll see good growth, and that coupled with what we saw last week from Google Cloud demonstrates that really this build out of the digital infrastructure remains healthy. We'll of course get an update from Meta on digital advertising, which I think remains healthy, as we saw from Google's search business last week. So a lot to look for, but I think the longer-term trends around cloud, AI, mobile remain intact and healthy.
How do you think investors are recalibrating expectations around CapEx spending here? You think about what it costs to make that transition when it comes to AI and how much patience investors have to see that money create a return quickly. Do you think investors are becoming less patient?
I think investors want to see growth. And so if we look at Google last week, they've indicated and they are spending aggressively on their technical infrastructure. I think that's the right strategy for them, as well as Microsoft, Amazon as well, given that their cloud businesses, in the case of Amazon, it's over $100 billion of revenue. And so they need to invest. And where there is excess capacity, Google, for example, they're investing in their search business, clearly cloud. They have other revenue drivers. Amazon has the same, as does Microsoft, to absorb it. Some of what we'll see, though, is the investor community wants to see the new revenue streams. You're seeing early signs of that, but that is going to take time. So the key is to invest on one hand and to play offense, and of course navigate the near-term cyclical headwinds. Be thoughtful on costs, but ultimately with an eye towards driving growth over the next 12 to 18 months.
Curious about what you think about other parts of the capital stack here, or the technology stack rather, because we also have Intel reporting this week. What are your expectations from them, given how much we've seen the stock fall off this year already?
Intel under Pat Gelsinger is undergoing a multi-year transition as they invest aggressively in the business, which is, I think, the right strategy. Parts of their business which are exposed to the enterprise, for example, have seen some softness, along with other companies exposed to the enterprise. But as you see progress on inventories, ultimately you should see better demand in PCs, perhaps helped by AI over the next several months. That can help others, Intel and others, like Advanced Micro Devices as well. And so the semiconductor companies, Qualcomm is another one. We'll see their results midweek. They're a leader in mobile. The businesses are cyclical, but those companies, and I'll mention Qualcomm, which has a significant opportunity in the edge or the mobile infrastructure. Think about factories, farms. Think about all the devices, and of course the Android smartphones where they have a role to play. So I expect cyclical headwinds to remain a focus, but the companies that can execute on their product roadmaps, I think, will emerge stronger from this period.
How do you play the chips and semiconductor industry at this point in time? You've just seen a major run-up in valuations. You think about the NVIDIA boom that you've seen. NVIDIA up still 130% this year. And you see part of that broadening, that market broadening story, not really just mean big tech to small cap, right? You see it mean people trying to find new ways into the AI story. How do you get into that narrative?
We look at it from a variety of perspectives. You mentioned NVIDIA. We continue to like that name, and it's not just the chips. It's really the software, the millions of developers on their platform, and a vibrant ecosystem, as well as, of course, continued execution on their roadmap. But a lot of companies, we talked about the cloud companies, they're big customers of NVIDIA, but they're continuing to innovate and invest in their own chip roadmaps as well. We like companies, for example, ASML, that make the systems, lithography in this case, that are really foundational to developing the newest and next generation of chips. And so we look at it from an equipment standpoint, we look at it from an R&D and a design standpoint, and then also we look at companies, we talked again about the cloud companies that can actually harness this and drive incremental revenue streams over the next 1 to 2 years. And we think the incremental revenue streams and the opportunities in the second half of the decade will be significant as we look out.
You look at the geopolitical rhetoric here as well as the tone you're getting, not just from the Republican side of the presidential elections here. Former President Trump really coming out with the tough on China, tough tariff policy being proposed, but also the Biden administration equally coming out with tough policies around China. What does this mean for any U.S. investor invested in the semiconductor and chips industry?
I think if I reflect on the last two administrations, both have been aggressive in terms of the U.S. policy towards China. I would expect that to continue for the foreseeable future. For the companies themselves, they really need to innovate, invest aggressively, manage costs as well, and deliver value to their customers. And so it will matter most, in my view, their innovation, because you'll have different individuals, I suspect, occupy the White House over the next 5 to 10 years. And of course, globally, you have a variety of different administrations in Europe. Clearly, China remains very important. And so I expect this continued bifurcation of the supply chains, but the companies, particularly the global ones, have to be able to navigate it. They have to be able to innovate, and they're going to have to respond when things come up. But if they can't innovate, then and they can't grow, no matter who is in the White House, that'll be difficult for them. For those who can grow, I think they'll be able to flourish even in what it remains a very difficult geopolitical environment.
Dan, we thank you for joining us today. The start of a very, very, very busy week for tech investors. That is Dan Flax, Senior Analyst at Neuberger Berman. Now, coming up, we're watching shares of NStar Group and what's said to be the second largest private equity-backed insurance deal of the year. We're going to have details on that next. This is Bloomberg. An investor group led by Sixth Street is agreeing to buy property insurer NStar Group for $5.1 billion. And it's said to be the second largest private equity-backed insurance deal of the year. NStar shares, though, are lower on the news and are on pace for their biggest drop in more than 4 years. Joining us now for more on this is Matthew Monks, Bloomberg News M&A reporter. And, you look at what's going on here. Stephen Mnuchin, Liberty Strategic Capital is part of this group. This does not look like a man that is about to rejoin a potential Trump administration in the future.
I couldn't agree more. He's definitely staying busy. So he did the New York community deal earlier in the year. He's been sniffing around TikTok. He's taking advantage of his connections and finding ways to put money to work.
So what is this group that has come together here? You have Sixth Street, Steve Mnuchin, J.C. Flowers, but you have a stock that is dropping on the deal, a 35-day go shop provision. What are the uncertainties around this deal? deal?
First of all, they're paying $338 per share in cash, which is about 2 or 3% less than where the stock was trading on Friday. So it's something of a takeover. A take under. So I think investors are responding to that. Why are they taking it under? Yeah. Now, why are they doing that? If you look at the press release, there's a little bit of a hint there where the CEO says this provides a liquidity event for all of our shareholders. And if you look at the stockholders, Stone Point owns a big slug of it still. You got CPBIB. I think Stone Point has some representation there. So it looks like it's an opportunity for the private equity firms that control a big slug of the company to get out. And Stone Point, as it goes, is staying in. They're going to provide some financing as well.
It's a strange one where it's like an exit of an asset as well as a takeover at the same time.
That's exactly right. And Flowers knows this company. He was invested in this company years ago. So it looks like some really smart financier types see something that the rest of us don't see. They're taking it under for a nice price, and they're going to do something different with it in the private markets.
Absolutely. It's super interesting deal here with the Flowers, of course, the like old school financial names that we're looking at here. Bloomberg's Matthew Monks, we thank you so much for your time. Before we let you go here, also taking a check on the markets because, of course, we are also on an up day here and a merger Monday, as we've been talking about as well, and a day before earnings season here, the calm before the storm. We're looking at an S&P 500 higher by about 0.5%, and then big tech names flying even higher than that. We're looking at the rest of the markets here pretty much unchanged. We were looking at the Russell 2000, not much movement there, but on the lower side, so the rotation change hitting a wall. I'm Shalini Bassick. That does it for Bloomberg Markets, and this is Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Joe Biden calls for term limits on the Supreme Court. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington. Nice to see you back here today in the Capitol. We're going to be hearing from the president a little bit later on today from Texas as Kamala Harris, Kaylee, spends time counting money after an historic round of fundraising.
Yeah, remember, it has been just over 1 week since Kamala Harris officially launched her own presidential campaign, and already that campaign has raised more than $200 million. And perhaps what's even more astounding than that figure in and of itself is that 66% of those donors were giving money for the first time this cycle. Speaks to the amount of energy that her candidacy seems to have inspired.
2/3. It is incredible. And a number like that, they would be celebrating for a month, never mind a week. But it really helps us also stop for just a moment, Kaylee, and consider what we've been through just in the last 2 weeks. 2 Saturdays ago, on our way to Milwaukee, we learned about the attempted assassination of Donald Trump and what has happened since then. J.D. Vance, of course, Joe Biden dropping out of the race, Kamala Harris becoming the nominee in waiting, and then numbers like this. It's remarkable how quick it's all taken place.
Yeah, and of course, there is still more that has yet to take place. By August 7th, Kamala Harris needs to decide who her vice presidential pick would be. How will it be someone who counters J.D. Vance or the Trump-Vance ticket overall? We still have a lot to learn. And of course, in the meantime, we still have a sitting president of the United States who is continuing to do his job and trying to cement that legacy, including pushing for these reforms.
We'll hear from him a little bit later on. 4:30, 5 o'clock Eastern time is what we expect from Texas. Jordan Fabian, Bloomberg White House correspondent, will join us in a moment with more on that. And Kaylee, we're joined today by Mick Mulvaney in studio with his view on the presidential campaign.
Yep, of course, former acting chief of staff in the Trump White House. So a lot is still ahead this hour. But we start, as always, with a look at the markets. Charlie Pellet has that for us up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
And good day to you both. We are looking at a mixed market right now. Most stocks are higher. Let's begin with the S&P 500 index. That benchmark up by about 0.4%, higher by 20, 54.79. The Dow has been struggling to find direction. Yes, it is up now. Little change, swinging between gains and losses, but up now by about 3 points. NASDAQ higher by 99, up by 0.6%. The NASDAQ 100 index up 0.7%, but a retreat for small caps, with the Russell 2000 index lower now by 1%. 10-year 4.17%, the 2-year 4.38%. Spot gold is declining today. Spot gold down 0.4%, 23.78 for an ounce of the precious metal. West Texas Intermediate crude tumbling 2.1%, 75.56 a barrel. And Brent crude, the global benchmark, trading back below $80 a barrel. Brent down by 2%. Morgan Stanley chief U.S. economist Ellen Zentner leaving her post to lead a newly created team within the bank's investment wing. According to an internal memo seen by Bloomberg, Zentner will lead the new thematic and macro investing team at Morgan Stanley's Global Investment Office beginning August 1st. Morgan Stanley shares, they are trading lower right now. We got Morgan Stanley down by roughly 1.5%. So again, recapping here, the Dow swinging between gains and losses. Little change right now. The S&P up 20, up 0.4%. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet up in New York. Thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lines alongside Joe Matthew, broadcasting live from Washington, where the president, Joe Biden, has just departed from. He's on his way to Texas, where he will give remarks later today about reforms he would like to see to the Supreme Court. In part, it's a call for term limits on Supreme Court justices. He also would like Congress to enact a formal ethics code for those justices. But he's looking for an amendment on presidential immunity. This, of course, is in the aftermath of something that, if you could believe it, also happened earlier this month when the Supreme Court decided that Donald Trump had partial immunity as president for official acts taken in office. And we know how Joe Biden reacted on the day that decision came down.
I know I will respect the limits of the presidential powers I have for 3.5 years. But any president, including Donald Trump, will now be free to ignore the law. I concur with Justice Sotomayor's dissent today. Here's what she said. She said, in every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. End of quote. So should the American people dissent. I dissent.
And so here we are today with Joe Biden, as Kaylee mentioned, on his way to Texas to roll out these proposed reforms, writing an op-ed in the Washington Post to accompany the visit. Quote, my plan to reform the Supreme Court and ensure no president is above the law, unquote. Jordan Fabian, Bloomberg White House editor and correspondent, joins us for more on this. Jordan, what's with the timing? Obviously, a very sensitive moment on the campaign trail. Kamala Harris is trying to get her act together here. The Speaker of the House says this is DOA. Why now, and who's listening?
Well, if you remember, Joe Biden was supposed to go down to the LBJ library a couple weeks ago, but then he came down with COVID, and that's what sort of precipitated the end of his presidential campaign. So this is a bit of a rain date for that. But look, now at this point, he's pressing something that is supported by many people in the Democratic base. A lot of voters don't like what the Supreme Court has done. The Supreme Court obviously giving Trump partial immunity, going back a couple years, stripping nationwide abortion rights. These are things that Democrats have been running against, and so this allows the president to amplify that. And now for Joe Biden, not facing re-election, it's a chance to cement some kind of legacy defining mission here, even though it's unlikely to happen this year.
Well, as we consider the unlikely chances of this actually happening, Jordan, it also raises the question if there are other avenues potentially that the president would try to pursue with executive privilege to get around Congress who may not be on board with this, or is really his only hope if he wants to see these reforms done, legislation?
It seems like legislation is really the only avenue, not to mention a constitutional amendment for the immunity section. And some legal scholars believe you might actually need a constitutional amendment to impose term limits on Supreme Court justices. So that's a pretty high bar to clear, especially in this polarized country. But if you look at it in a different way, even though it's likely not going to happen this year, this is Joe Biden, kind of changing the terms of the debate here. The Supreme Court reform, once a position that was championed by the left wing of his party, is now being picked up by the president, who has positioned himself at the center of the party. So now he's defining this as a mainstream position within the Democratic Party going forward.
How does this help Kamala Harris on the campaign trail, if at all, Jordan?
It definitely complements her message on abortion rights. I mean, she has really picked up the mantle on that issue from Biden, who really was kind of uncomfortable talking about it throughout his career. And so this sort of complements that in a way to say, look, we've seen the Supreme Court justices who've made these controversial decisions get tied up in ethical scandals. Clarence Thomas, for example, Samuel Alito with these reports about the flags being flown at his home, and so it provides some fodder for their supporters to say, hey, we know that you're angry about all of the stuff the Supreme Court does. Here's what we're doing about it.
All right, Bloomberg White House correspondent Jordan Fabian, thank you so much as we continue to assess what continues to be a history-making news cycle when it comes to both the current president and, of course, his vice president, who is running to replace him come January of 2025. And of course, the other candidate in this race is former President Donald Trump. And joining us now here in studio, someone who worked in the Trump White House, is acting chief of staff. Mick Mulvaney is with us. He, of course, also is co-founder of the Freedom Caucus, is a former congressman from South Carolina, former director of the OMB. We all know you have a very long resume. Mick, great to see you in person. Not much going on these days since the last time we caught up with you. It has been a while. So much has happened in such a very short period of time, including for Donald Trump. Yeah. Not just in surviving an assassination attempt, then selecting J.D. Vance as his vice presidential candidate. Happened before.
Busy couple weeks.
Joe Biden dropped out of the race and Kamala Harris became the presumptive nominee. Knowing what you know of Donald Trump, do you think he regrets that choice or would have decided differently if he had the knowledge we now have?
Listen, I'll preface this by saying, look, anybody who says now they know exactly what's going to happen has been proven wrong, right? Because we're way through the looking glass now. I mean, no one ever expected any of this. So if you sit here and say, well, absolutely X, Y, Z, I could be proven entirely wrong tomorrow. So with that caveat, I don't think there's much chance they're even having this conversation. Here's why. Let's say that I'm Donald Trump and I'm thinking about Joe Matthew for position X. Kayleigh, what do you think about Joe? What do you think about Joe? He's a good guy. What do you hear about him? Okay. If he's asking those questions of somebody that he hasn't hired yet, it means he's thinking about hiring them. If he's asking similar questions, Kayleigh, what do you think about Joe? What kind of a job is he doing? What are you hearing? And he's already hired that person. That means he's thinking about firing that person. Okay, that's how the dynamic works.
Wow. Sure.
I've not heard any of that out of the Trump team right now. Trump is not asking people what do they think about J.D. Vance. How's he doing? I do have some questions about whether or not the vetting team knew about these things that we're now hearing about.
Like the childless cat lady thing.
Exactly. Did they hear about that? And listen, there's a pretty good chance they did. They got a pretty good social media team, and they probably just didn't care. Again, J.D. was a selection born of supreme confidence. They thought they were going to win. They still think they're going to win, and they just wanted somebody that Trump likes to work with. And they didn't want to worry about any of the dynamics of picking up states or demographics. It's the only person, remember, that he can't fire after the election. Cabinet secretaries, chiefs of staff, whatever you can get rid of. You can't get rid of your VP. Yeah. So they took him because they liked him, and they still think they do. So, look, he could get fired tomorrow. I get it, but I'm just not hearing it.
So what's your view on the way this race has changed? Don Levy from Siena was on with us earlier telling a remarkable story about momentum in the polls. It's been a game changer, certainly coming even with Donald Trump here in the states that matter. $200 million in a week, getting enormous amounts of free media. Should Donald Trump be more worried than he was a week ago?
More worried. I think if he was going to waltz into the White House against Joe Biden.
So how do you describe it now? Is it still his to lose?
I think I went from an 80-20 kind of race to a 52-48 kind of race. Keep in mind, and there's an axiom in this business that you're never really more popular than the day you announce you're running for office. And it's all downhill after that. In fact, that happened to Kamala Harris back in 2020. She had that fabulous rollout. Where was it, Oakland or San Francisco? I can't remember. And I remember watching her on TV going, those are Trump-type rallies. That's a tremendous rollout for a campaign. This is when she was running for president. And then 6 weeks later, she's gone before Iowa even opened up. So you're never more popular than you are in day one. You expect a bounce. Look, I give the Democrats credit. I never expected them to get their act together this quickly. I was sort of, buying popcorn and getting ready to hunker down in front of the Democrat National Convention and just watching the fireworks, thinking it was going to be a wide open sort of rodeo. It's not. And you give them credit. They have done better than I think a lot of folks, including some Democrats, expected them to do. But this race is far from over. And I think you're going to hear a lot of things about Kamala Harris from Republicans over the next 99 days.
Well, so as we think about the excitement her candidacy seems to have generated, to Joe's point, a big part of this is money. The Kamala Harris campaign has raised more than $200 million. A lot of that from first-time small dollar donors. We aren't necessarily hearing much fundraising news out of the Trump campaign to counter that. And I just wonder how you think about the cash part of the equation here and the ability to spend money in the states that matter.
Yeah, look, it's no question about it. It's absolutely critical. It's probably more critical down ballot than it is for anything else. But at the end of the day, I mean, look, Trump had a great news cycle. I think the last time they put out numbers, how he outraised Biden. Kamala Harris has had a good number this time. Both of these teams are going to have enough money to do everything that they want to do. Now, down ballot's a different story. So if you're Hakeem Jeffries or you're Michael Johnson, you're fighting and slugging it out for every single seat in the House for majority down there. If there's enough money is a question that still remains. But at the top of the ticket, they're going to have enough dough to do what they want. And keep on, you never know, is money that comes in today money that was going to come in tomorrow, or is it really new money? Is it just money that came in earlier? Was it money that was held back last time? There's all sorts of variables when it comes to money raising. But listen, no one's going poor in this race, that's for sure.
Yeah, that is for sure. I don't know if the campaign cares at all who Kamala Harris is going to run with. I suspect that there's some consideration there. But if you take the red hat off for a minute, who do you think Kamala Harris, if it's down to this three, does she go with somebody like a Rust Belt governor? Does it need to be a swing state? Why are we talking about governor of Minnesota, for instance?
You fall back on the basics, right? On how you usually pick a vice president. You pick a vice president based upon a need for your campaign.
Yes.
Is it money, which is why Reagan took Bush? Is it expertise, which is why Dukakis took Benson? Is it a swing state, which is why Romney took Ryan? Didn't work out that well, but that was the pick. I think you're back in that world right
swing
now.
State.
It's a swing state type of thing.
So right? Shapiro then, right?
So, well, no, because you've got, what are the swing states?
Yeah.
Shapiro's on the list.
Well, you can do Kelly in Arizona.
Kelly
in Arizona. Whitmer in Michigan. Walz in Minnesota is a state they'd love to lock up. No question about it. And if they really
so
think
there is a geographic advantage to Walz in Minnesota.
Absolutely. Much more so, say, than Cooper in North Carolina, who I really don't think the Democrats think they can win. And Bashir, who's a very talented guy, a Democrat who won in a red state, whose name has sort of fallen off the map already because it's not a swing state. So I think that's where they're looking at.
Well, we also understand that her campaign is considering not just who they want to be vice president, but also the kind of policy that they want to pursue. There's been reporting in the last few days, especially in the aftermath of Donald Trump's appearance at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville this weekend, that the Harris campaign is looking to court the crypto industry a bit more, for a reset, if you will. We've heard the same from Democrats who support her, like Congressman Wiley Nickel, who's pro-crypto. Do you believe that? And do you believe Donald Trump, who used to call Bitcoin a scam, is actually going to be friendlier toward the industry this time around?
The answer to the second question is yes.
Okay.
Easy, because I don't think this is not one of the things that Trump is married to, right? Trump feels very strongly about immigration and taxes and regulation, okay? That he really, really does. I don't think he cares really one way or the other about crypto. So if you say, well, he's changed policies from last time when he was in office, yeah, and I buy that. And he could be the greatest offender of crypto in the world. I absolutely believe that's possible. To your first question, do I believe when it comes to the Democrats? And here's why. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a Republican and they're Democrats. They've got, look, both parties are big parties, right? You only got two parties in a country of 350 million people. They're not going to be monolithic. But within that Democrat Party, on this particular issue, they have a wide variety of issues. Who are the most anti-crypto people in this town? Liz Warren and Bernie Sanders, maybe. Certainly Liz Warren, maybe Dick Durbin. I can't remember.
Gary Gensler.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot about Gary. Yeah, hi, Gary. It's good to see you. Yeah, so I mean, are there Democrats like Wiley Nickel who are strongly pro-crypto? Absolutely. But the big names in the anti-crypto world, the people that really would love to ban it if they got the chance, are Democrats. And I think that's a problem that Kamala Harris is going to have to navigate that Donald Trump doesn't.
So if Donald Trump can have an evolution like that on crypto, does Elon Musk help him find religion on EVs?
You know, the thing on EVs, I think, is probably less the concept of an EV and whether or not we're doing it in what Trump might be able to describe as an America First sort of manner. Are we making them, or is somebody else making them? Go back to the speech that he gave about the car industry in Mexico that got wrongly attributed as that bloodbath speech.
Right, yeah.
I think that was not an anti-EV speech. It was an anti-China speech.
Tesla the version that he'd like to see?
I think if Tesla could make an argument that they've got a way to provide low price, good quality, non-government subsidized electronic vehicles, why would Donald Trump care? But yeah, to your point, because I could see the twinkle in your eye, if you spend $45 million a month or whatever the number is, do you get an open door pass to the White House? The answer is yes, you do.
Wow.
So he was there. I think I bumped into him.
He used to be the gatekeeper at the White House.
I've met him half a dozen times. One of the most strangely intelligent men you've ever met in your entire life. I'm not sure I understood a thing that he said, but I'm pretty sure he's a lot smarter than I am.
Well, he didn't get an invite the day GM, Chrysler, Ford, Stellantis were there, did he?
I don't think he needs, when you've got the private number, I don't think you need to come in with the rest of the crowd.
Fair enough. Let's not let another month go or whatever. It's been a year.
It's my fault.
It's been a year in political history.
Right. Well, it's, amazingly, people all around the world want to talk about our election.
How about that?
I had no idea. I'm huge in Australia, by the way, in case, thank you very much.
Wow, all right. Well, they have good taste. Let us know what they're asking you next time you're on. Mick Mulvaney, always a treat, former acting chief of staff, Trump administration, co-founder of the Freedom Caucus. Kaylee, we've looked forward to this conversation for a minute. We'll get him back soon for you here, and we'll assemble our panel coming up next. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano holding forth here on the fastest show in politics, and it's only Monday. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. Stay with us on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks back in the green now across the board. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ are all advancing. S&P up 19, a gain of just about 0.4%. The Dow, little change, but still higher by 18 points. We've got NASDAQ up 89, a gain of 0.5%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, however, does remain lower. Right now, the Russell 2000 is down 1.1%. Stocks are higher ahead of major central bank decisions. We've got the Fed decision on Wednesday, a jobs report Friday, and of course, earnings from 4 mega caps worth nearly $10 trillion. 10-year yield, 4.71%. The 2-year, 4.38%. Gold, spot gold down 0.3%, $23.80 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 2.1%, $75.56 per barrel of WTI. The Biden administration announcing today it has purchased 4.65 million barrels of crude oil for the nation's emergency cash as it continues refilling the depleted reserve. McDonald's investors shrugging off the burger chain's first sales drop in 4 years as executives pledge to launch new promotions to help stem a decline in customer visits. McDonald's up now by 4.4%. Rival Restaurant Brands International, which is the parent of Burger King, QSR on the ticker, up by 1%, and Wendy's higher by 1.7%. Recapping, stocks higher, S&P right now up 19, a gain of 0.4%. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew as we pay attention to the happenings here in Washington, yes, but also around the world when it comes to politics. And certainly there is a lot of political news coming from Venezuela after the country's presidential election on Sunday. The country's electoral council has just certified that Nicolas Maduro, of course, the incumbent president, won the election yesterday and will have another 6-year term, his third. However, this comes after the opposition cast doubt on the actual results of the election. Exit polling has suggested that Maduro's challenger was actually polling far ahead of him. And Venezuela, of course, earlier this afternoon, Joe, named an opposition leader, Maria Machado, as a key suspect in its investigation into alleged electoral sabotage. And this has taken the notice of many countries around the world, including the U.S. We heard from Secretary of State Antony Blinken earlier today saying that he had serious concerns about these results in Venezuela.
Serious concerns. The result does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people. That's where we are here. And Maria Corina Machado, who Kaylee mentions, called the result impossible, saying we won. And the whole world knows it. So the question, Kaylee, then becomes about U.S. response. And Bloomberg has a really important story just up on the terminal. Eric Martin writing that the U.S. will determine future sanctions on Venezuela based on whether Maduro's government fully releases voting data here. So we're just at the beginning of this story, it seems.
Yeah, and of course, it was in part the U.S.'s own data and the exit polls that it were seeing that were mismatched with what actually came out of the Electoral Council in Venezuela. So this is, to your point, Joe, a story that is certainly far from over. The U.S. not the only country that has a lot of drama around its election these days.
Yeah, how true. Let's talk about the drama in our own. With our signature panel back with us today on the Monday edition of Balance of Power, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors, holding forth here as we try to make our way through the Veep stakes in the next week or so. As Kaylee mentioned, they've got it down to 3 here, and we'd love your take on this story and, of course, many of the other cross currents in the campaign. Jeannie, what's your take right now on the big 3 that Bloomberg has highlighted, the governors of Minnesota and Pennsylvania, as well as the senator from Arizona? They each bring their own promise. But in the case of Tim Walz of Minnesota, not a swing state. What do you think Kamala Harris is considering?
You know, I was surprised that he is on the top 3 to a certain extent because I think if you're going to go swing state, you might as well go big with Pennsylvania or Arizona. But of course, they would like to lock up Minnesota. And he does have an important record out there. He is well known. He is well liked. He was auditioning this weekend on the Sunday shows. So certainly he is in contention. One thing that I think is worth noting is this drive to go with a white man and leaving aside Gretchen Whitmer, who said she doesn't want to be considered. But Michigan and Whitmer is a really important state. And I keep in the back of my mind wondering, does Kamala Harris surprise everybody by going with Whitmer? She is a very good politician, well-liked in her state. It's a swing state. It's one the Democrats need. And I think to count somebody out due to gender is troubling to me. So I just want to put that out there. But that's what we've been hearing. They're looking for a white man.
Yeah, well, and certainly most of the list does seem to be comprised of that. But Rick, what do you think about Jeannie's point on Governor Whitmer, who herself has said she wants to stay in Michigan in the job she currently has? Is this about America's perhaps lack of readiness to have a female president and vice president, or is this just about someone saying, don't pick me, please?
Yeah, I think that we have to believe Whitmer that she doesn't want to be picked, so she's not on a list anymore. I think she was on an earlier list that had been circulated. I think Gina Raimondo was on another earlier list that had been circulated. I mean, I don't think they're not looking at women. I think they're finding that they have other options, and I think they're clearly looking at targeted states like Arizona, and Pennsylvania. And by the way, Minnesota is not a chip shot for Democrats. At one point in time, right after the convention, the Republicans came out of there saying, we're putting all these states in play. We're going to put Minnesota in play. We're going to, put other states that are sort of, Democrat-leaning states in play. And so to be able to lock up Minnesota, with Tim Walz is not a bad option for the Democrats. Takes another, chess piece off the board and gets the focus back down to where the Democrats, I think, always wanted it, which is there are only 6 or 7 states that matter. Let's keep our focus on that. We're not looking at Minnesota. We're not looking at New Hampshire, these other border leaners. So, I think they've got the trading range down to where they want it. I think they've done it effectively in a very short period of time. Now you got to pick them, and they all have advantages and disadvantages. They all have different personalities. And I think all of them, though, tend to benefit the ticket. And you think that's kind of obvious, except J.D. Vance, I mean, in retrospect, everyone in the Republican Party scratching their head going, how in the world did this benefit the ticket?
It's really interesting you say that, Rick. The Washington Post reporting that in the last 2 days before Donald Trump picked J.D. Vance, quote, an array of senators, donors, conservative media personalities, and other supporters, unquote, urged Donald Trump to pick someone else. As we consider childless cat ladies, Rick, where are we on the idea here that Donald Trump may have made a poor choice and buyer's remorse throughout the GOP?
Look, when Don Jr. is calling the shots, this is what you get. And I think that there's such a close link around former President Trump and his family. And I'm sure that the family echo chamber is strong, that J.D. Vance was the guy all along, that he's the one who can continue the march for MAGA. And that may be true on its own, right? Whether MAGA, can expand beyond Donald Trump's, current constituency. Yeah, I don't think anybody believes Vance can do that for them. But look, I mean, there is a portion of the Republican Party, or at least the MAGA party, where, he's wildly popular, regardless of some of his cat lady mentions and things like that. So it may be weird, but it is the current state of play within the Republican Party.
Well, we should hear from the senator from Ohio and vice presidential nominee himself, because he was asked about the cat lady thing last night on Fox. Here was how that went down.
Nuns and priests aside, do you agree that there are people who very much love this country and are invested in its future, but they also happen to be childless?
Oh, of course I believe that, Trey. And if you look at the full context of what I said, it's very clear the Democrats have tried to take this thing out of context and blow it out of proportion, which is what they always do, Trey.
Jeannie, blown out of proportion or not, the genie's kind of out of the bottle on this one. Are Democrats going to be able to keep up this line of attack on J.D. Vance, or are they going to have to come up with something else, as we still have 4 months to go and a lot of the enthusiasm and energy we've maybe seen over the last week isn't necessarily sustainable for the next 99 days?
I think there will be more. This was a doozy by J.D. Vance to walk it back. He goes and talks to Trey Gowdy and Megyn Kelly. That's not going to do it. And so he just keeps stepping in it more and more. The reality is, to win this election, Republicans cannot discount suburban women. And that's what his movement into the vice presidential pick has threatened to do with statements like this. I mean, is there a way to come back from it? For sure, but we haven't seen them do this yet. But the reality is, this is all about Donald Trump. Donald Trump not listening to the establishment talking about how everybody else makes VP picks is nothing new. In my view, he wanted somebody who would do his bidding in a way Mike Pence wouldn't, and that's what he was going for, and hence he turned his back on people that may have made more sense, like Doug Burgum and some of the others on the list, and doubled down with J.D. Vance, which doesn't reach out and get him the votes he needs to win some of these swing states.
All right, Rick and Jeannie, we thank you, as always, our signature panel with us on the Monday edition of Balance of Power. Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis will join us as well a bit later on in the later edition of Balance of Power. That starts at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Kaylee, that'll be right around the time that Joe Biden is talking about the Supreme Court, which will be potentially newsy, although it's hard to see the path on the proposals that he is putting forward when it comes to term limits and a code of ethics. We've got an interesting headline here we should mention before the news. The House announcing the bipartisan task force to probe Trump shooting. They're being comparing this to a Warren Commission, essentially, following what happened. And the reporting today on the fallout of this assassination attempt is remarkable. The New York Times publishing text messages showing that security officers at the rally identified and talked about Thomas Crooks for more than an hour and a half before he opened fire on the former president.
Yeah, more details continuing to come to light, remembering that this happened just about 2 weeks ago. It was not that long ago, as we all have been living in what feels like warp speed in American politics. And surely more details will come to light as we have this task force looking into the assassination. It's actually being led by Republican Congressman Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania, who, of course, had been pushing, given the proximity of Butler to his district. So we'll have much more on that, of course, throughout the day here on Bloomberg, specifically on Balance of Power. First, though, let's get an update on world and national news with Amy Morris in the 99.1 newsroom here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Kaylee. President Biden has unveiled a long-awaited proposal for changes at the Supreme Court, calling on Congress to establish term limits and an enforceable ethics code for the court's 9 justices. And he's pressing lawmakers to ratify a constitutional amendment limiting presidential immunity. Democrats hope it will help focus voters as they consider their choices in a tight election. Vice President Kamala Harris zeroing in on a group of potential running mates. She's facing a 2-week dash to make the biggest decision of her presidential bid. People familiar with the process say a short list has emerged, including 3 elected officials with nationwide appeal: Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. Harris is expected to make a decision by August 7th. Novak Djokovic dominated rival Rafael Nadal at the start and then held off a comeback attempt to win 6-1, 6-4 at the Paris Summer Games in the second round of the 60th and likely last head-to-head matchup between the two tennis greats. France and U.S. each have 14 medals. This is Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got the Dow lower, the S&P, NASDAQ. They are both advancing. We've got the S&P 500 index climbing 16 points, up 0.3%. NASDAQ up 81, now up 0.5. And we have got the Dow in the red, trading lower by 6 points. Little change. The Dow really has been struggling to find direction today. Big tech climbing, small cap slipping after rallying as much as 10% in July. Today, the Russell 2000 index lower right now by 1.3%. 10-year 4.17% with a 2-year that's now yielding 4.38%. Spot gold, a lower little change, down 0.2%, 23.82 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 1.9%, 75.70 right now for a barrel of WTI. Well, this is a week that will be bringing a Fed rate decision. We'll also have earnings coming out from major tech companies this week, including Microsoft, Meta Platforms, Apple, and Amazon. Microsoft reporting tomorrow, up now by about 0.9%. Amazon ahead of earnings, up 0.8%. Apple up 0.4%. And Meta Platforms up now by 1.3%. All of those reporting this week. Again, recapping, Dow lower, S&P trading higher. S&P up now by 0.3%, higher by 15 points. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
Charlie Pellet, thank you, and thanks for being with us on the fastest show in politics. Welcome to our TV and radio audiences worldwide. This is Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons, talking politics with our eye on the financial markets as well. A big week for both, Kaylee. We've got a Fed meeting Wednesday. We've got earnings. This is the big one, right?